June 2009. Helmand Province, Afghanistan. Afghanistan is often referred to as the graveyard of empires. What U.S. Marines and British soldiers encountered at an outpost during the heart of the War on Terror was no empire. It was not insurgents, but rather an unexplainable force. A force that would haunt the troops that were stationed there, leaving them with stories they could not explain. What force has taken a hold of this outpost? An outpost known as O.P. Rock. Welcome back to Unblurring the Unknown. I am your host, Dominic, and in the spirit of Halloween getting closer, I decided to pivot away from my normal content and bring you a paranormal story. This paranormal story being one that is very perplexing, and it was a lot of fun to research, and there's a deep dive into history in this episode, and history of this particular region of Afghanistan, and a deep dive into what these soldiers experienced when that they were stationed over at that outpost. Now, before I get rolling into the episode, I just want to say, don't forget to like and subscribe to my YouTube. Please turn on notifications on Spotify so you get notified every time I post a new episode. But now, let's get into the story of O.P. Rock. Now, our story, in the main story, is going to start in 2009. Now, I'm going to start with the most famous story of O.P. Rock, and then I will go into a little bit of history, and I will also kind of collect it all together at the end before sharing my personal theories on what I think is happening. Now, into the story. Now, during 2009, when the biggest story of O.P. Rock takes place, the U.S. is making a push against the Taliban in Afghanistan, and during this, the U.S. is pushing through arguably Afghanistan's most dangerous province, that being Helmand Province. And Helmand is pretty much a sprawling desert that is littered with villages and insurgent activity. It is known for its production of poppy and approximately 42% of the world's opium, and it is obviously a very dangerous place. Now, during this time, a small group of Marines are given an order to go to an observation post that is currently occupied by British forces. Now, this observation post was named Observation Post Rock. Now, with Observation Post Rock, most observation posts they're on the high ground. And the idea of that is obviously so you have the vantage point in case of any conflict. Now, the thing is with Observation Post Rock is that they didn't necessarily have the high ground. This kind of hardened dirt mound that the observation post was built on was also surrounded by more of these hardened dirt mounds, so they really didn't have much of a vantage. So kind of put yourself in a soldier's shoes if you're stationed at that outpost when you don't necessarily have any high ground. It's kind of a scary thought if you start to think of it. If you get ambushed or attacked by the Taliban, you don't have normal vantage that you would normally have. Now, this small group of Marines, there was 8 of them, and they were stationed there for 60 days. Now, when the Marines arrived, the British were extremely eager to see the U.S. troops, as they wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. Now, the British didn't want to do turnover ops, and really just wanting to leave. Now, turnover ops being, before the U.S. takes full control of the base, the British would show them the general area. Okay, these are some hot spots of activity that we've noticed, so on and so forth. They wouldn't just basically, give them, the keys to the car, for example, and just tell them to drive. No, they'd show them how to drive before they gave them the car, if you understand that metaphor. Now, like I said, the British didn't want to do these turnover ops, and according to the Marines, the British had acted like they'd almost been fighting at O.P. Rock for a decade, even though they had only been stationed there for 60 days, like these Marines were going to be. Now, before the British leave, one of the British soldiers tells the Marines that if they happened to dig anything up while they were at the post, to simply put it back. Now, the Marines are puzzled by this and ask why, and the British soldier simply replies with, "If you dig anything up, just please put it back." Now, obviously, like I said, they were very perplexed by this, but again, they didn't really think much of it and kind of went along their business. Now, the first night, a Marine is standing guard duty, and his radio starts cracking, as if a message is going to come through his radio. Now, he doesn't think much of it, and as the crackling from the radio stops, he continues on his guard duty. Little on later, the crackling returns from the radio, and hears voices coming from it. Now, he couldn't make out what they were saying at first, and then a voice came through. And that voice is what he believes is a man speaking in Russian. Now, the Marine radios to the main base, asking if anyone is trying to get communication out to OP Rock, and the main base gets back to him immediately and says that there were no outward or inward communication that they were receiving. This unknown radio chatter continued through the night, and as the morning comes up and the second day dawns, the guard duty changes. When the night watch Marine comes down, he informs the new watcher to change the radio out, as he thinks that it was acting weird and could just be a glitch of some sort, because obviously the main base said that there was no communication coming into OP Rock, so he naturally assumes it is a glitch. Now, as it's morning, all of the Marines are up, and they are starting to take stock of the surrounding areas and what they have at their disposal at the post. Now, OP Rock, as I mentioned, doesn't really have much of a high ground, so the risk of being victim to a sniper was a real threat. So inside the shelter and around parts of the post was a small trench dug so that you could stand fully upright and your head wouldn't be exposed in the event of an attack by a sniper, as obviously nobody wants to get shot in the head because your trench is too small. The Marines were like, okay, this trench is nowhere near deep enough, so let's dig it deeper. If we ever get attacked, we risk losing our lives if the trench is too shallow. So when they notice that it's too shallow, they decide to dig. And when digging this trench deeper, one Marine hits a piece of metal. And when he pulls it out of the ground, it looks to be a engineering spike of some sort with foreign writing on it. Foreign writing that looked very much like Russian writing. Now, that's the second time I've mentioned the Russians, and you're thinking, okay, 2009, War on Terror, heart of Afghanistan, what is, a disembodied Russian voice coming across the radio and a piece of metal with Russian writing have to do with the War on Terror in the United States and Afghanistan? Now, that brings me in to you getting into the Unblurring the Unknown history class as I tell you why the Russians were in Afghanistan. Now, in 1979, and over the course of 10 years, Afghanistan saw extensive combat with the Soviets. Now, this later became known as the Afghan-Soviet War and was one of the big conflicts that took place during the Cold War. And obviously, I hope everybody knows what the Cold War was. Now, Russia marched into Afghanistan to install a Soviet-friendly government. Now, back then, Afghanistan was known as the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan. Now, when Russia launched an operation to assassinate the then leader of Afghanistan, which was successful, thus starting a coup and instilling a Soviet ally in the chair of Afghanistan. Now, this caused uproar from the citizens of Afghanistan, and this conflict escalated. It saw the Afghan Mujahideen, aka, freedom fighters, and other military conflicts and military, basically guerrillas, to fight back against the Russians. Needless to say, Russia didn't like this and invaded Afghanistan. Now, the Mujahideen got support from the United States, the United Kingdom, Pakistan, China, and Iran, as they weren't big fans of the Soviets marching in and uprooting democracy at this time in history. Now, this conflict lasted for 10 years, and over the course of those years, over 500,000 to even 2 million Afghans were killed, and many others fled the country as refugees. Now, eventually this war took a giant hit on Russia's economy, and the fact that they were met with extremely heavy resistance by rebels, and also they had extreme difficulty traversing the mountainous areas of Afghanistan. Now, because of a combination of all these things, the Soviets would withdraw in 1987, and the last of the Soviets' troops would not fully withdraw from Afghanistan until 1989. And later scholars would feel that the Russians' failure to fully secure Afghanistan actually eventually led to the collapse of the USSR. Obviously not a sole responsibility as to why the USSR collapsed, but a contributing factor. Now, back to 2009, back to the story, and you're out of history class for right now. Now, back to OP Rock. As the Marines kept digging, they find pottery and ceramics in another part of the trench, and as they keep digging, they find human remains. Dozens of human remains in the forms of skeletons. Now, the Marines came to a point to acknowledge that they were in possibly a very naturally creepy place, and that this was probably not a normal observation post. Now, obviously, the Marines left the skeletons there, as obviously they did not feel like it was right whatsoever to remove the skeletons from their natural resting place. So they left them there, put them back, and decided not to disturb them. Now, on day 13 of their 60-day station at OP Rock, one of the younger Marines who was a part of this group of 8, who had actually just turned 20 at the time of this incident taking place, was on night guard duty. Now, he starts to get this uncomfortable feeling of being watched, and that someone was right behind him. Now, he turns around, back towards the camp, so he's in the guard shack, guard tower, he turns behind him, towards the camp, and he doesn't see anybody. Now, the second he turns around, he hears this extremely loud scream come from back outside the post walls. Now, he shoots back around, and he's looking out into the blackness of the desert, and sees a man running from one bush to another bush through his night vision goggles. Now, as a soldier, your first instinct is, okay, we're about to be attacked. Now, because of the scream, the rest of the Marines are awake, and they have no idea what's going on. The Marine on watch tells the others that there might be a threat outside the walls, and that he saw a man go from one bush to another bush about 200 meters out. Now, the Marines down inside the post look out into the barren blackness with their night vision goggles, their thermal imaging scopes, and they don't see anything. And they couldn't seem to find where this person went. Now, even the post's watchdog was barking and barking like crazy, like somebody was out there, but there was no one out there. They scanned the desert, and there was nobody there. There was no hits on their thermal imaging scopes. Nobody could see anything through the night vision goggles. Almost like that person didn't exist, and that person was not there. Now, the Marines remained on high watch for the rest of the night, even though they couldn't figure out where this person had went. They had no idea if they were going to get attacked that night. Now, they didn't end up getting attacked, but obviously the Marines were like, okay, that was really weird, and they kind of just chopped it up to being something unexplainable, and they kind of just went about their business the following morning. Now, a couple weeks later, a different Marine in the guard shack was standing post when he felt a unexplainable cold front come through the shack. Now, we couldn't really explain why this could be the case, as this is Afghanistan, and it is extremely warm, and it's the desert. You shouldn't feel cold in the desert, and just kind of a random gust of cold air felt very weird. Now, as he gets this cold front, he gets this feeling that if he's being watched from behind. Now, he keeps looking over his shoulder, but obviously no one's there. He's the only one in the guard post. Then he starts hearing whispers, like someone is whispering in his ear, and then footsteps on the roof of the shack. Now, thinking that this could be a fellow Marine playing some sort of practical joke or trick on him, he goes outside to check and see if someone was on the roof. And of course, no one was there. Now, the rest of the Marines were sleeping, so it wouldn't make sense as if, like I said, the Marine was playing a practical joke or a trick of some sort. Everybody was sleeping, so it couldn't have been one of the Marines on top of the shack. Now, he thought maybe he heard something come from the outside of the post walls, and he raised his rifle with his thermal imaging scope and scanned the area. And he actually saw a man standing a couple hundred meters away. Now, this man was standing there with his fists raised in front of him, like if you were about to fight somebody and you raise your fists in front of yourself. That is how he was standing out in the desert, this man. Now, this Marine couldn't really believe what he saw, as this didn't really make any sense. This is the middle of the night, it's the middle of the desert, and this man is just standing there with his fists raised in the middle of the desert, and he was baffled. Now, he couldn't really believe this, and he kind of lowered his rifle to kind of see if he could see the person standing out in the desert, and he doesn't. And when he raises his thermal sight again to look to where the man was standing, the man was gone. And now, over the course of the rest of the night, this Marine on watch would continue hearing the footsteps on the roof and the whispers around him, even though no one was there. Now, this Marine, quite frankly, thought he was going crazy, which was a very realistic thing to think, because at this time they didn't really know what was going on. This Marine thought he was crazy because this isn't making sense. Now, he told his superiors that he felt like he was going crazy, he couldn't stay there any longer, and he requested a transfer, which was granted to him. Now, a lot of the other soldiers, they didn't really take this well, as everybody else was there. They were kind of in a very shitty area. This is not a great outpost. They felt like this Marine was abandoning them. And that was mostly because the rest of the group had not yet had any of these experiences yet. So these events would continue, and these Marines would, they would see figures standing out in the desert that would disappear and reappear. They would get tapped on the shoulder when no one was around, and they could hear voices that they couldn't explain. Now, these Marines, obviously, when that soldier transferred, then they started to realize, okay, maybe he wasn't crazy. Maybe there was some truth to what he was saying about unexplained apparitions in the desert and all of these things, and they're consistently having these experiences, and they just could not explain them. Now, the day before they leave, on day 59, all of their radios go dead at the same time. Like a flip of a switch, they all go dead. Now, the Marines are trying to figure out why this could be happening, and as the designated Marine who was assigned to working on the comm systems at the base said that he had not changed anything out from the radios, he had not done anything to them in any way before they went dead. Then all of a sudden, machine gun fire opens up from around the camp walls, and the Marines scramble. They are taking cover against the post walls, and the lookout in the guard shack has no idea where the gunfire is coming from. Obviously, ambush can come at any time, and this seems to have been when it's happening. It's an ambush when they least expect it, and they are taking cover left and right, and it's the worst feeling. I can imagine them being in there and having no idea where the fire is coming from, and obviously being in an outpost that does not have very great tactical advantage, and I can only imagine the fear that they had in that moment. Now, as they are taking cover against the post walls, they're hunkered down and they're trying to figure out where the fire is coming from. And that is when they hear the distinct whistling of an RPG, or a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. Now, when a rocket-propelled grenade is fired from its launcher, it kind of makes a distinct kind of plunk noise and like a whistle. And they obviously brace for impact because they hear this sound, and they hear the RPG slam outside of the post. And again, the lookout still has no idea where the gunfire is coming from. And actually, one of the superior officers goes up to the guard post, is able to manage to get up into his way to the outpost, and is like, "Hey, where's the fire coming from? Where's the fire coming from?" And the lookout guard had no idea where the fire was coming from. He scanning the desert back and forth, and he had no idea where the fire was coming from. And then, just as quickly as all the gunfire started and the assault opened up, it stopped. And gunfire ceased. No, obviously the Marines didn't just poke their heads out once the gunfire stopped. They obviously waited on high alert for numerous hours, and there was no more gunfire, and what seemed to be no threat. Now, once they got out of their positioning in the post, they go to inspect the damage, obviously assuming the outpost being absolutely peppered with gunfire and peppered with an RPG, that there would be tons of destruction done to the base that they would have to repair, or so on and so forth. But when they go to look at the damages, there is none. There's no damage. As if they were not shot at, as if they did not just have a gunfight. There was no anything. There was no damage, no bullet holes, no mark from an RPG, no nothing. Like they had not even been attacked. And they were absolutely dumbfounded by this, because they had no idea what this was. Now, obviously this being day 59, the next day being the 60th day, when the next group of soldiers came in to relieve them, this group of Marines understandably got out of there as quickly as they possibly could. And now they understood why the British were so eager to leave. As that they were not fighting the Taliban. It was almost like they were fighting ghosts. They were fighting the paranormal. They were fighting something that they had no idea what it was, and a threat that they couldn't even understand was a threat. Now, that's obviously the most infamous story of OP Rock, and this infamous story was actually predated by the first U.S. troops to arrive at the outpost in 2008. Now, when the U.S. initially pushed the Taliban out of this location, now the Marines would go on to describe this as, like I said, a hardened dirt pile. This particular dirt pile just offered slightly better advantage than all the surrounding areas, and when they pushed them out, they gave it the nickname of the Rock. And obviously, everybody called it the Rock as it was exactly what it was, the Rock. And not the Dwayne Johnson, the Rock, I'm making a stupid joke. But before the U.S. troops flushed the Taliban out from this defensive position, and as they were doing so, Lance Corporal Brendan Kelly discovered tunnels. Now, he discovered a small series of them that led to a single room, perhaps a fort or even a tomb. Now, when the U.S. troops were clearing this out, the demolition charge they used to basically get rid of the Taliban in this area and use to flush them out, this demolition charge collapsed the tunnels, and you could even say this perhaps unleashed the spirits residing there. So obviously the tomb or fort that Corporal Kelly saw is currently buried as this charge destroyed the tunnels. Now, that being said, OP Rock has changed hands many times throughout the course of history, and it saw its fair share of usage from both the Mujahideen and the Russians during the Afghan-Soviet War. Now, it was used as a fortification, but it was also used as a graveyard and as a burial site for the bodies upon bodies that were left over from the violence of that time, and even the time that predates the Afghan-Soviet War. Now, in the modern days, before the U.S. and British controlled this area, it was controlled by the Taliban and it was used as a fort. But even then, it even saw its history as a spiritual site, even before the burial site. So this hardened dirt pile has seen the likes of of being a fortification, being a spiritual site, and being a burial site for the dead over the course of history. And locals claim the history of this specific area goes back centuries, and that the violence and the bloodshed is centuries old, and that there's bodies that are there that are centuries old. But the first person to discover the rock is unclear, and locals and scholars kind of agree on that instance that nobody knows who first discovered the rock. Now, obviously, many empires have had their footholds in Afghanistan, including Alexander the Great. Now, locals of the nearby village of Garmsir say back in the 1740s, the area was first used by ethnic groups, and when the base or fort-like structure of OP Rock was first built. And then from the ethnic groups first coming in the 1740s, it changed back and forth from fortification to burial site, spiritual site, and then most infamously as a graveyard in the 1980s because of the Afghan-Soviet War. And the last usage of the structure being used as a burial site actually came during that time. Now, local scholars told of an incident in the Afghan-Soviet War in which insurgent commander Nasim Akhundzada, and if I say that wrong, I apologize, Nasim Akhundzada and his men captured 40 Afghan communist fighters and executed them all at the rock and buried their bodies in the ground there. Now, obviously, family members of some of these Afghan communist fighters unearthed the bodies of their relatives and obviously took them to other resting places, but for the most part, most of the bodies that were executed by Commander Akhundzada, to my knowledge, are still there, and from everything that I researched, are still there. Now, stories from the outpost persisted past 2009, and it just came to be known as the haunted outpost by U.S. forces, many of which share very similar encounters and experiences from the most infamous story in 2009. Now, they have experiences with the spirits that include seeing mysterious lights, strange radio static, the feeling of being watched, the smells of what soldiers described as quote-unquote something dying that would come in gusts at night that they couldn't explain, and even disembodied voices that some soldiers reported sounding like that of a Russian language. Now, one report in one incident involving a Marine where he heard whispers, he actually heard the words, and I'm going to say this completely incorrectly, but bear with me. He heard the words, Broze Aruze, which obviously, like I said, I know I said that wrong. These two words loosely translates to drop your weapon in Russian. Now, including the paranormal, soldiers here were often also victims of persistent nightmares and even episodes of sleep paralysis. Now, many soldiers thought that these experiences that they were experiencing at OP Rock could be explained by the toils and hardships of war and the toll it takes on your mental and physical health. But eventually, once the stories became more widespread, common belief became that this outpost has seen its history of bloodshed, and maybe in fact it is also inhabited by a force us as humans don't fully understand. Now, that being said, that brings us kind of into our theories section. Now, I feel like theories is going to be very limited, because obviously we're talking about an event that has multiple witnesses over multiple generations of experiencing paranormal activity that they cannot explain. And I think with all the evidence that I have found and all the articles that I have read, and obviously you can look up these articles. New York Times has an excellent article on this that I read extensively, and it was actually New York Times the first report the story of OP Rock, because obviously all the Marines came forward and were sharing their stories of what they experienced. I honestly think that this entire thing is real. I feel like I don't think it's a hoax from war. I think you have Afghans speaking on the cryptic nature of this area, and the reports from the British and the U.S. saying this area is creepy, that it's foreboding, and that, honestly, you're never truly alone there. And it's honestly a truly scary thing to think about, and I can't imagine what living at OP Rock was truly like. And I honestly think that this is a very scary and very realistic real-world ghost story as it gets. And as we get closer to Halloween, I wanted to channel the ghost story and share a ghost story that I felt was very, very interesting and perplexed, and maybe one that not everybody has heard of. But as much as I think it is real, could some of it be fake? Quite possibly. I think that there might be isolated instances that could be chalked up to, PTSD, or just the impact that war has on you mentally, or even maybe hallucinations that could be caused by that. But honestly, I don't think that that's the case. I think that this area has seen so many people report on it, and has seen so much death, and so much violence, and so much bloodshed over generations, and obviously with the bodies being there, and obviously multiple generations of people disturbing the dead. And I don't claim to be a paranormal expert by any means, but obviously, I believe that the dead are there for a reason. They're there to rest. When you disturb the dead, you stir up something that you're probably not supposed to. So I think that fully plays into this, and I think that this is a story that is extremely cryptic. And if you guys want to do more research onto this, I highly encourage you to do so. There was actually a episode of this done on the Sci-Fi Channel, on a ghost series they had a couple years back. I believe it was 2015. There was an episode of this on the Sci-Fi Channel. Feel free to take a look at that. I did not have the time, unfortunately, to check that out, but I do highly encourage anybody else who is very interested and invested in the story to definitely go check that out. But obviously, I think that that's going to conclude today's episode on OP Rock, and I hope that you all enjoyed this episode. Obviously, like I said, I wanted to go the route of a ghost story because of it getting closer to Halloween, and this being honestly a extremely creepy story, and an extremely, almost at times ridiculous story of the amount of activity and the amount of just pure encounters that the Marines had. And like I said, feel free to do more research on this. I did a bunch. There was a whole bunch of articles. I couldn't possibly get to them all. And I found that there's more articles than there is YouTube videos. So definitely you're going to have to do your fair share of reading when researching this, but just an FYI. But like I said, yeah, that's going to conclude today's episode. Obviously, feel free to go check me out on Instagram, Unblurring the Unknown. I will have photos relevant to today's episode. That's where I post them all. And also pictures relevant to my past episodes as well. And as I plugged in the beginning of the episode, feel free to check me out on Spotify if you're not already on Spotify. Turn on your notifications just so you get notified every time that I post a new episode. And go ahead and subscribe to me on YouTube as well. In addition to that, also send me topic suggestions. You can send them to my email at unblurringtheunknown@gmail.com. I will say that again for you. unblurringtheunknown@gmail.com. It helps me out. It helps me plan these episodes. And I saved this announcement till the very end. I will be doing a very special Halloween-themed episode. So stay tuned for that. I will be doing that. I know I kind of did this kind of spooky ghost story to kind of get you all in the Halloween spirit. But I am doing a specific Halloween episode, and I'm still on the fence on whether or not for that to be just 1 week of research and have an episode next week, a regular episode next week, or do full-on research for 2 weeks and release you all a extra long episode on Halloween as the Halloween special. I am still debating that. Please be patient with me on that. I hope to announce that to you all very soon, so we can, and most importantly me, plan and do enough thorough research to give you guys a thorough Halloween special that you all deserve. Now, that being said, that is going to conclude today's episode of Unblurring the Unknown. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you find this as fascinating as I do. This was, I think, arguably one of the most fascinating topics that I've covered up to this point, and it's truly a crazy story. But I hope you all enjoyed it. That being said, thank you, and I will see you all in the next one.